The Silver Coin's Secret, A Werewolf's Forbidden Love. Chapter 1, Blood and Betrayal. The morning mist clung to Evangeline's trembling hands as she counted the 2 silver coins in her palm, all she had left after selling the magnificent black stallion that had appeared in her barn 3 nights ago. The horse had been worth a fortune, but desperation made fools of everyone. Behind her, the sound of heavy boots on wet gravel made her blood freeze. Kieran Ashworth, her ex-fiancé, stood silhouetted against the grey dawn, his cruel smile cutting through the fog like a blade. "Did you really think you could hide from me in this pathetic excuse for a farm, Eva?" His voice carried the same venom that had poisoned their relationship for 2 years. She clutched the coins tighter, feeling their cold edges bite into her skin. The mysterious horse had been her only hope of escape. Its sale would have given her enough money to disappear forever. Now Kieran had found her anyway, and she was trapped with nowhere left to run. The wind howled through the empty barn where the black stallion had once stood, its haunting cry echoing her despair. Kieran stepped closer, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the mud of her humble farmyard. His presence made everything feel smaller, dirtier, more hopeless. She remembered when those same hands had held hers with false tenderness, before she learned what monsters could hide behind handsome faces and silver tongues. "You owe me, Evangeline. You destroyed my reputation when you ran away from our wedding. Do you know how that made me look?" His words dripped with entitlement and rage. She took a step back, her spine hitting the rough wooden fence post. The coins slipped from her numb fingers, falling into the mud with tiny splashes that sounded like her last hopes dying. Kieran's eyes followed their descent, and his smile widened with cruel satisfaction. Suddenly, the air itself seemed to change, electric, dangerous, alive with something she couldn't name. A shadow fell across the farmyard, and Evangeline looked up to see a stranger approaching through the mist. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of a predator, he seemed to materialize from the fog itself. His dark hair caught what little light filtered through the clouds, and when their eyes met, she gasped. Golden. His eyes were pure molten gold, and they burned with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. "Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in the Philippines, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Is there a problem here?" The stranger's voice rolled through the morning air like distant thunder, deep and commanding in a way that made both Evangeline and Kieran freeze. He moved closer with unhurried confidence, his presence somehow filling the entire farmyard despite his calm demeanor. Evangeline noticed how his hands remained loose at his sides, but there was something coiled about his posture, like a spring wound tight and ready to release devastating force at a moment's notice. Kieran's face flushed red with indignation. He was used to being the most intimidating person in any room, but this stranger made him look like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. "This is a private matter between me and my fiancé," Kieran snarled, puffing out his chest. The stranger's golden eyes flicked to Evangeline's terrified face, then back to Kieran, and something dangerous flickered in their depths, something that made the hair on Evangeline's arms stand on end. "She doesn't look like she wants to talk to you," the stranger observed, his tone deceptively mild. Evangeline felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at his words. When was the last time someone had stood up for her? When was the last time someone had even noticed her distress? She watched as he stepped between her and Kieran, not touching her but creating a barrier with his body that made her feel safer than she had in months. Kieran's hand moved toward his jacket, and Evangeline's heart lurched with terror. She knew he carried a gun, he'd threatened her with it before. But the stranger moved faster than should have been possible, his hand closing around Kieran's wrist with crushing force. "I wouldn't," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made the birds stop singing in the nearby trees. Kieran went pale, his bravado crumbling as he stared into those impossible golden eyes. "This isn't over, Eva," Kieran gasped as the stranger released him. He stumbled backward, cradling his wrist, his face twisted with humiliation and rage. "You can't hide behind strangers forever. I'll find you again." He turned and fled toward his expensive car, but his parting words hung in the air like a curse. Evangeline watched him go, trembling with relief and terror in equal measure. She was free for now, but she knew Kieran well enough to know he would keep his promise. Chapter 2: Golden Eyes and Hidden Truths. The stranger turned to face her, and Evangeline found herself drowning in those extraordinary golden eyes. Up close, he was even more striking: sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, skin that seemed to glow with inner warmth despite the cold morning mist. But it was his eyes that held her captive, ancient and knowing in a way that made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was gentler now, concerned in a way that made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. "I'm fine," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. She wasn't fine. She was broke, alone, terrified, and running out of places to hide. The 2 silver coins lay forgotten in the mud at their feet, and she stared at them with a mixture of grief and despair. Those coins represented her last hope, her only chance at freedom, and now they were as dirty and worthless as she felt. The morning mist swirled around them, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic and cold that made her newly awakened senses prickle with unease. The stranger followed her gaze and knelt to retrieve the coins, wiping the mud away with surprising gentleness. The moment his fingers made contact with the silver, Evangeline saw his entire body go rigid. His golden eyes flashed with something that looked like shock, then fury, then devastating sorrow, all in the span of a heartbeat. When he placed them in her palm, his fingers brushed against hers, and she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with fear. His skin was warm, almost burning hot, and for a moment she wondered if he had a fever. But it was the expression on his face that truly frightened her, a look of such profound anguish that it made her stomach clench with dread. "Tell me about the horse," he said quietly, but his voice had changed. Where before it had been gentle and concerned, now there was an edge of barely controlled desperation. Something in his tone made her look up sharply, and she saw that his hands were trembling slightly as he stared at the coins in her palm. The silver seemed to catch what little light filtered through the clouds, gleaming with an otherworldly luminescence that made her eyes water if she looked at them directly. "How do you know about the horse?" The question escaped before she could stop it, and she saw something flicker across his handsome features, something that looked like pain so deep it could break mountains. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, as if he was weighing every word against the potential for catastrophe. "I've been looking for him," he admitted, and Evangeline's heart sank. Of course. The horse had been too magnificent, too valuable to truly belong to her. She should have known someone would come looking for such a creature. But there was something else in his expression, something that suggested the horse meant more to him than simple monetary value. "His name is Shadowmere," the stranger continued, and the name sent shivers down her spine. "And you're not the thief I expected to find." The way he said it made her feel like he was speaking in code, like there were layers of meaning beneath his words that she wasn't equipped to understand. Evangeline found herself studying his face more carefully, noting the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the way his dark hair seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the predatory grace with which he moved even in his stillness. There was something not quite human about him, something that called to a part of her she had always kept locked away. "The trader who bought him," she began hesitantly, watching his reaction carefully. "He was strange. Not like the usual horse dealers who come through these parts." She remembered the man clearly now, tall and pale, with eyes that seemed to see too much and hands that were cold as winter even in the warm barn. He had moved with unnatural silence, appearing suddenly in her doorway like a shadow given form. He insisted on paying with those specific coins. Said they were ancient, more valuable than regular currency. The stranger's golden eyes blazed brighter at her words, and she could swear she saw actual flames dancing in their depths. "Describe him," he commanded, and there was such authority in his voice that she found herself obeying without question. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, making the air around them shimmer with barely contained energy. Tall, thin, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. His hair was white as snow, but he didn't look old, exactly. More like, ageless. And his eyes. She shuddered, remembering the way those ice-blue orbs had seemed to look right through her. They were cold. Not just the color, but actually cold, like looking into a frozen lake. He barely spoke, just examined Shadowmere for a long time, running his hands over the horse's coat like he was checking for something specific. "Did he give you his name?" The stranger's voice was tight with barely controlled rage, and she noticed that his hands had clenched into fists. The temperature around them seemed to be rising, as if his anger was generating actual heat. Steam began to rise from his clothes, and the morning mist retreated from his presence as if repelled by some invisible force. "Cassius," she whispered, and the effect of the name on her mysterious rescuer was immediate and devastating. He staggered backward as if she had struck him, his face going pale beneath his olive skin. A sound escaped his throat that was part growl, part roar of anguish, and for a moment his human facade seemed to slip entirely. She caught a glimpse of something else beneath, something wild and magnificent and terrifying. "No," he breathed, and the word carried such despair that it made her chest ache in sympathy. "Cassius Morvain. Victor's most trusted lieutenant. And these." He gestured to the coins in her palm with a hand that shook with suppressed fury. "These aren't payment, Evangeline. They're a binding contract written in silver and sealed with ancient magic." The words hit her like physical blows, each one sending waves of shock through her system. "What do you mean, binding contract?" But even as she asked, some primal part of her already knew the answer. The coins felt heavier in her palms suddenly, their silver surface burning against her skin like brands. She tried to drop them, but found that her fingers wouldn't obey. They were somehow stuck to the metal as if magnetized. "Vampire law is older than human civilization," the stranger explained, his voice heavy with centuries of knowledge and bitter experience. "When one of their kind offers payment for a service, accepting those coins creates a blood debt. By taking them, you've agreed to belong to Victor Dracul's coven. You've marked yourself as his property." The world seemed to tilt around her, reality shifting in ways that her human mind struggled to comprehend. Vampires. The word should have sounded ridiculous, like something from a gothic novel or a late-night horror movie. Instead, it explains so many things: Cassius's unnatural stillness, his ice-cold touch, the way Shadowmere had shied away from him despite his gentle handling. And if vampires were real, then what did that make the golden-eyed stranger who spoke of them with such intimate knowledge? The traitor, Cassius, he knew exactly what he was doing, she said slowly, pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. He wasn't buying Shadowmere at all. He was buying me. The realization made her stomach churn with revulsion and terror. All her life, she had felt like she was running from something, never knowing what. Now she understood that something had been hunting her all along. The stranger, she still didn't know his name, moved closer, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "The coins are enchanted with blood magic," he explained gently, as if speaking to a frightened child. "Once accepted, they create an unbreakable link between you and their true owner. Victor can track you anywhere now, call you to him whenever he chooses. The binding grows stronger with each passing hour until eventually, you won't be able to resist his summons." Panic rose in her throat like bile. She clawed at the coins, trying desperately to pry them from her palm, but they seemed to have fused with her skin. The silver was warming now, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her frantic heartbeat. "Get them off," she gasped, holding her hand out to him. "Please, you have to help me get them off." But he shook his head sadly, pain etched deep in every line of his face. "I can't touch them again. They're vampire magic, anathema to my kind. If I try to interfere with the binding, it could kill us both." His golden eyes blazed with helpless fury, and she realized that her terror was nothing compared to his anguish. This stranger cared about her fate, deeply and personally, in a way that defied rational explanation. "You're kind?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, though part of her already suspected the answer. Everything about him screamed predator, the fluid way he moved, the supernatural heat radiating from his skin, the eyes that glowed like molten gold in the pale morning light. And if vampires were real, then surely other monsters walked among humans as well. He studied her face for a long moment, clearly weighing his words. "My name is Lysander Nightfall," he said finally, and the formal introduction carried weight and power that made her bones vibrate with recognition. "And I'm something that vampires consider their ancient enemy." His form seemed to shimmer and blur around the edges, as if reality itself couldn't quite contain his true nature. "I'm a werewolf, Evangeline. An alpha." The words sent electricity racing through her veins, awakening something that had been sleeping in her blood for her entire life. Werewolf. It should have terrified her, should have sent her screaming into the forest. Instead, she felt a deep, primal recognition, as if every cell in her body was singing with relief at finally meeting something that understood her true nature. The dreams that had plagued her for weeks suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't nightmares at all, but memories of what she was meant to be. "The horse," she whispered, understanding dawning like sunrise after the longest night. "Shadowmere isn't just any horse. He's yours." And if Lysander was a werewolf, if he had sent his guardian spirit to find her, then Victor's interest in her went far deeper than a simple vampire's desire for another human servant. There was something about her specifically that both sides wanted, something that made her valuable enough to risk open conflict. Lysander nodded grimly. "Shadowmere is bound to my bloodline, has been for over 1,000 years. I sent him to find you because I felt something calling to me, something that spoke to the deepest part of my wolf's soul. But I never imagined Victor would move so quickly, or that he would use such an ancient and binding form of magic." His hands clenched into fists again, claws sliding out to gleam wickedly in the misty air. "The blood contract supersedes all other claims. Even if you're my destined mate, even if every fiber of my being recognizes you as mine, the vampire law gives Victor first right to you." Destined mate. The words hit her like lightning, sending shockwaves through her entire being. She stared at this magnificent, dangerous man who spoke of wolves and vampires and ancient magic as casually as others discussed the weather, and felt something deep inside her chest unfurl like a flower blooming after winter. This was why she had never fit in with normal human society, why every relationship had felt hollow and meaningless. She had been waiting for him, for this moment of recognition that transcended reason and logic. But even as her heart soared with the knowledge that she wasn't alone, wasn't broken or wrong or incomplete, the silver coins in her palm pulsed with malevolent warmth. The vampire magic was working its way through her system like poison, creating pathways that Victor could use to control her thoughts and actions. She could feel it happening, could sense her free will being slowly eroded by forces beyond her understanding. "How long do I have?" she asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Terror was giving way to a cold, clear determination that felt new and strange and powerful. If she was truly Lysander's mate, if she carried wolf blood in her veins, then she wouldn't go down without a fight. Vampires and werewolves might be ancient and powerful, but they had underestimated what a desperate woman could accomplish when everything she held dear was threatened. "Hours, maybe less," Lysander admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "The binding is already taking hold. I can smell the change in your scent, can see the way the magic is affecting your aura. Soon, Victor will be able to call you to him, and you won't be able to resist." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell his intoxicating scent of pine and rain and something indefinably wild. But there might be a way. Hope flared in her chest like a candle flame in a storm. "Tell me." "The binding can only be broken by a power greater than vampire magic," he explained, his golden eyes burning with desperate intensity. The full moon rises tonight. If I can get you to my pack's sacred grove, if the ancient wolf spirits accept you as one of our own, their blessing might be strong enough to sever Victor's claim. His hand reached up to cup her face, thumb tracing gentle circles on her cheek. But it's dangerous. The transformation to awaken your wolf blood fully could kill you, and even if you survive, Victor will know the moment the binding breaks. He'll come for you with everything he has. Evangeline leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. The alternative was clear: become Victor's puppet, lose herself piece by piece until nothing remained but an empty shell carrying out a vampire's will. At least this way, she would die as herself, fighting for her freedom and the chance to be with her true mate. Then we don't have time to waste, she said firmly, and saw pride and admiration flare in his golden eyes. The coins in her palm were burning now, their silver surface too bright to look at directly. Soon, they would complete their work, and she would belong to the vampire coven body and soul. But until that moment came, she was still free to make her own choices. And she chose to fight. Chapter 3, Secrets in the Shadows. I'm not a thief at all, Evangeline said, her voice stronger than she felt. He just appeared in my barn 3 nights ago. I waited, thinking someone would come looking, but I was desperate and... She stopped, realizing how pathetic she sounded. Here was this powerful, wealthy man who clearly owned the magnificent stallion, and she had sold his property for a handful of coins because she was too weak to face her problems. The stranger, she still didn't even know his name, studied her with those unnerving golden eyes. You sold him to the traveling horse trader, he said, and it wasn't a question. Somehow, he already knew. For 2 silver coins. There was no judgment in his voice, just a quiet understanding that made her want to cry. She nodded miserably, unable to meet his gaze. I can get him back, she whispered desperately. I can track down the trader, explain the situation. I'll work off the debt, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. But even as she spoke, she knew it was hopeless. The trader had been heading north toward the big city markets, where Shadowmere would disappear into the maze of buyers and sellers forever. She had no money for travel, no way to track them, no power to negotiate. What's your name? The stranger asked suddenly, and the unexpected question made her look up. His expression had softened somehow, the predatory intensity replaced by something that looked almost protective. Evangeline, she answered automatically, then flushed at how breathless she sounded. There was something about this man that made her feel like a shy schoolgirl despite the dire circumstances. Evangeline, he repeated, and her name sounded different in his deep voice, important, cherished, like something precious. My name is Lysander Nightfall. And I think it's time you learned the truth about the horse you found. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell his intoxicating scent of pine and rain and something wild she couldn't identify. Shadowmere didn't wander into your barn by accident. He was sent to you. Sent to me? Evangeline's voice came out as barely a whisper. That's impossible. I'm nobody special. I'm just a farmer's daughter who inherited more debt than land. But even as she protested, something deep inside her resonated with his words. She remembered the way Shadowmere had looked at her with intelligence that seemed almost human, the way he had allowed her to approach when he could have easily trampled her or fled. Lysander moved closer, and she could see golden flecks in his eyes that seemed to swirl and dance like living flame. You're much more than you know, Evangeline, he said softly. His hand reached up to touch her face, and she should have stepped away from the stranger, should have been afraid. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. Tell me about the dreams. The question hit her like a physical blow. How could he possibly know about the dreams? For weeks now, she had been plagued by vivid nightmares of running through dark forests, of howling winds and golden eyes watching her from the shadows. She had told no one, convinced they were just stress-induced fantasies brought on by Kieran's threats and her desperate circumstances. I don't know what you mean, she lied, but her trembling voice betrayed her. You dream of wolves, Lysander continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her cheek. You dream of running on 4 legs, of hunting beneath the full moon, of a pack that calls to your blood. You wake up feeling like you've forgotten something important, something that would explain why you never quite fit in the human world. Each word he spoke was like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed, opening doors in her mind that she had kept firmly shut. Suddenly, his eyes began to glow brighter, the golden color intensifying until they seemed to burn in the misty morning light. Evangeline gasped and tried to step back, but found herself frozen by the sheer power radiating from him. I am Lysander Nightfall, Alpha of the Silver Moon Pack, he said, and his voice carried new authority that made her bones vibrate with recognition. And you, Evangeline, are the mate I have been searching for my entire life. Chapter 4, Awakening the Wolf Within. The world tilted on its axis. Evangeline's mind reeled as she tried to process Lysander's words, but they seemed to bounce off her consciousness like stones skipping across water. Mate? Alpha? Wolves? These were things from fairy tales, not from her small, desperate reality of debt and fear and 2 silver coins in the mud. Yet something deep in her chest was singing with recognition, a part of her she had always kept locked away suddenly straining toward him like a compass needle finding true north. You're insane, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Even as she spoke, memories were surfacing, childhood nights when she had sleepwalked into the forest and been found miles from home with no memory of how she got there. The way dogs had always cowered from her despite her gentle nature. The strange strength that sometimes surged through her body when she was angry or afraid, making her capable of lifting impossibly heavy objects or moving with inhuman speed. And deeper than those conscious memories, something else was stirring, flashes of images that couldn't be her own, visions of a woman with golden eyes and midnight hair who sang lullabies in a language that sounded like wolf song. Lysander stepped closer, and now she could see that his skin held an otherworldly luminescence, as if moonlight flowed through his veins instead of blood. But there was something else in his expression now, something that looked like the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders. His golden eyes, so beautiful and compelling, held depths of pain that made her heart ache in sympathy. Shadowmere came to you because I sent him, he explained, his voice hypnotic and compelling, but strained as if every word cost him dearly. My pack has ancient magic, and I used it to find you. But Shadowmere isn't just a horse, he's my guardian spirit, bound to my bloodline for over 1,000 years. When she had first touched the magnificent black stallion 3 nights ago, she had felt a jolt of recognition that went beyond the physical. Now she understood why. The horse's intelligent dark eyes had looked at her with knowledge and purpose, as if he had been searching for her specifically. When you touched him, Lysander continued, his voice growing quieter, more pained, you awakened the dormant wolf in your blood. Blood that I should have recognized the moment I scented you. As if responding to his words, something stirred inside Evangeline's chest, a wild, fierce thing that had been sleeping all her life. She could suddenly smell things she had never noticed before, Lysander's intoxicating scent of pine and rain and something indefinably masculine, but underneath it was something else, something that made her newly awakened instincts recoil with inexplicable alarm. The lingering odor of old guilt, of secrets buried so deep they had become part of his very essence. The rich earth beneath their feet teeming with hidden life, but also the metallic scent of ancient violence that clung to him like a shroud. You keep saying my blood, she said slowly, her enhanced senses picking up the way his heartbeat accelerated at the words. But I don't understand how that's possible. My mother was human. She died when I was 3, some kind of accident in the woods. And my father. She trailed off, realizing she had never actually known anything concrete about the man who had supposedly abandoned them before her birth. Lysander's face went ashen, all the color draining from his features as if she had struck him. His hands, which had been reaching toward her, dropped to his sides and clenched into fists. Your mother, he repeated, and his voice was hollow, devastated. Tell me her name. Serena, Evangeline replied automatically, though she wondered why it mattered. Serena Blackthorne. Why do you? But the words died in her throat as she saw the effect her mother's name had on him. The powerful, confident alpha who had faced down Kieran without flinching was now trembling like a man facing his own execution. Serena Blackthorne, he whispered, and the name seemed to tear something vital from his chest. Golden eyes like yours. Hair black as midnight. A laugh that sounded like silver bells and a voice that could call wolves from 100 miles away. Each detail he spoke was like a dagger thrust, precise and devastating. She was the most beautiful creature I had ever seen, and I killed her with my own hands. The world stopped. Time seemed to freeze in that moment between heartbeats, between breaths, between the life she had known and the terrible truth that was about to shatter everything. What did you say? The words came out as barely a whisper, but they carried the force of thunder in the sudden silence. Lysander looked at her with eyes full of anguish so profound it was like looking into the depths of hell itself. 18 years ago, I was a different man. Younger, more arrogant, absolutely loyal to the Wolf Council and their laws. When they told me there was a rogue hybrid threatening to expose our world to humans, I didn't question it. I didn't ask for details or investigate the circumstances. I simply hunted her down and executed her like the good little soldier I was trained to be. Each word hit her like a physical blow, but she found she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. The man she had felt such instant connection to, the alpha whose presence had awakened her sleeping wolf nature, was confessing to murdering her mother. The ground beneath her feet seemed to be crumbling away, leaving her suspended over an abyss of betrayal and grief. The council told me she was dangerous, Lysander continued, his voice breaking with self-loathing. They said she had gone mad with hybrid fever, that she was planning to reveal the existence of supernatural creatures to human authorities out of spite for being rejected by both worlds. They painted her as a monster who had to be stopped before she destroyed everything our people had worked centuries to protect. But she wasn't, Evangeline managed to whisper, though the words felt like swallowing glass. Somehow, even without conscious memory of her mother, she knew with absolute certainty that Serena Blackthorne had been nothing like the picture the council had painted. She was trying to protect you, Lysander said, and now tears were streaming down his face, carving silver tracks through his otherworldly beauty. I didn't know about you until it was too late. Didn't know she was pregnant, didn't know she had given birth to a child who would inherit both vampire and werewolf bloodlines. She wasn't planning to expose our world out of madness or spite, she was going to reveal everything because she knew you would never be safe as long as the supernatural community could hunt you in secret. The full scope of the tragedy began to unfold in her mind like a flower blooming in reverse, petals of understanding falling away to reveal the poisonous core beneath. Her mother had been trying to save her, and the Wolf Council had sent an assassin to stop her. That assassin had been Lysander, the man whose touch now sent lightning through her veins, whose presence made her feel complete for the first time in her life. I found her in a clearing not far from here, he continued, his voice barely audible now. She was so beautiful, even facing death. And she didn't fight me, didn't try to run or plead for her life. She just looked at me with those golden eyes, your eyes, and said, please, when you find my daughter, tell her I loved her enough to die for her freedom. The sob that escaped Evangeline's throat was part human grief and part wolf howl, a sound of such pure anguish that it seemed to tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. Her mother's last words, carried all these years by the very man who had killed her, finally reaching the daughter she had died trying to protect. I didn't understand what she meant then, Lysander continued relentlessly, as if confession was the only way to purge the poison from his soul. I thought it was just the ravings of a dying woman. But after she was gone, I found evidence of what she had really been planning. Documents, recordings, proof that she had been preparing to offer herself as a bridge between worlds, to use her hybrid nature to negotiate peaceful coexistence between humans and supernatural creatures. She was trying to save everyone, Evangeline breathed, understanding flooding through her like ice water. Not just me. She wanted to prevent the war that exposure would inevitably bring. The council knew, Lysander said, his voice flat with the weight of ultimate betrayal. They knew exactly what she was planning, knew it would have worked, knew it would have saved countless lives on both sides. But it also would have meant the end of their absolute power over our kind. So they sent me to murder the only hope for peace our world had ever seen. The rage that swept through Evangeline then was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was pure, primal, the fury of a wolf whose pack had been slaughtered and a daughter whose mother had been stolen from her by political machinations and masculine pride. Power erupted from her small frame in waves that made the air itself seem to catch fire, her eyes blazing with inner light that was part werewolf gold and part something else entirely. Something that spoke of her vampire heritage finally awakening in response to her emotional extremity. "You killed her," she snarled, and her voice carried harmonics that no purely human throat could have produced. "You murdered my mother because a bunch of old men were afraid of losing their precious control." "Yes," Lysander said simply, making no attempt to defend himself or deflect her rage. "I killed the only woman I had ever loved, destroyed the only chance for peace our world had ever known, and orphaned the most precious child in existence. And I have spent every day of the last 18 years trying to find a way to atone for what I did." The admission that he had loved her mother hit Evangeline like another physical blow. Not only had he killed Serena, but he had done it knowing he was destroying someone he cared about. The cruelty of it, the tragic waste, made her want to tear him apart with her bare hands. "The reason I've been protecting you from the shadows," he continued, his golden eyes never leaving her face even as she radiated enough supernatural fury to level buildings, "isn't because you're my destined mate. It's because you're her daughter, and I owe her a debt that can never be fully repaid. Every vampire I've killed before they could hunt you, every council assassin I've eliminated, every threat I've neutralized, it's all been penance for the greatest sin of my existence." "Penance," she repeated, the word tasting like ashes in her mouth. "You think watching over me from afar somehow balances the scales? You think playing secret guardian makes up for the fact that I grew up without a mother because of your blind obedience to monsters?" "No," he said quietly, and the simple honesty of it deflated some of her rage. "Nothing I do will ever make up for what I took from you. But when I discovered that Serena's daughter had inherited her hybrid nature, when I realized that you were facing the same threats that had driven your mother to desperation, I couldn't stand by and let history repeat itself." The pieces of her strange, isolated life began falling into place with horrible clarity. The mysterious benefactor who had paid off her father's gambling debts when she was 16. The job opportunities that had appeared whenever she was on the verge of total desperation. The way dangerous situations had a habit of resolving themselves just before they became truly threatening. She had thought she was simply lucky, that the universe occasionally smiled on those who had already suffered enough. In reality, she had been under the protection of her mother's killer, a guardian angel with blood on his hands and guilt in his heart. "Shadowmere wasn't sent to find your destined mate," she said, understanding cutting through her fury like a blade. "He was sent to find Serena's daughter so you could continue your vigil." "I told myself it was duty," Lysander admitted, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. "I told myself I was honoring her memory by keeping you safe. But the moment I saw you, the moment I scented your unique hybrid nature, I knew the truth. You weren't just Serena's daughter, you were everything she could have become if I hadn't stolen her chance to grow into her full power." The mate bond she had felt so strongly, the instant recognition and attraction, it had all been built on the foundation of his guilt and her inherited trauma. What she had thought was destiny was actually the ghost of her mother's love calling to the man who had destroyed her family. "The connection between us," she said slowly, pieces of the puzzle still falling into place in her mind. "It's not real, is it? It's just my wolf responding to hers through you." "I don't know," Lysander replied with devastating honesty. "I've felt drawn to you since the moment I realized who you were, but I can't separate my guilt from my desire, my need for atonement from what might be genuine love. All I know is that you deserve better than the man who made you an orphan." The pain in his voice was so profound that it cut through her rage like a knife, leaving her feeling hollow and lost. Everything she had thought she knew about herself, about him, about the connection that had sparked between them, was tainted by this terrible revelation. How could she trust any emotion when it might just be the echo of her mother's stolen life? She knew, didn't she? Evangeline asked quietly, her fury giving way to a grief so deep it felt like drowning. In that clearing 18 years ago, she knew you were going to kill her. She knew, Lysander confirmed, his voice breaking. And she faced death with more courage and grace than I had ever seen in 1,000 years of existence. She forgave me even as I took her life, told me that if I ever found you, I should help you become everything she never had the chance to be. The image of her mother, brave and beautiful and utterly alone, facing her executioner with forgiveness in her heart, was almost more than Evangeline could bear. Serena Blackthorne had died not just to protect her daughter, but to save a world that had rejected her, killed by a man she somehow found the strength to forgive even in her final moments. I've spent 18 years trying to become worthy of her forgiveness, Lysander said softly. Trying to honor her memory by protecting what she died for. But seeing you now, seeing how strong and brave and magnificent you've become despite everything that was stolen from you, I realize that my penance will never be enough. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Evangeline looked at this man who had shaped her entire life from the shadows, who had killed her mother and then spent nearly 2 decades trying to atone for that sin. The connection she felt to him was real, she could sense that much, but it was built on foundations of guilt and grief that might never fully heal. What happens now? She asked, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a strange peace that felt like acceptance rather than forgiveness. Now, Lysander said, his golden eyes meeting hers with painful honesty, you decide whether the man who destroyed your family deserves the chance to help you claim the power your mother died trying to protect. Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. A distant sound cut through the morning air, the roar of Kieran's engine returning, accompanied by other vehicles. Evangeline's newly awakened senses picked up the scent of gun oil and aggressive male pheromones even before she saw the headlights cutting through the mist. But there was something else beneath those familiar odors, something that made her blood run cold with recognition she couldn't yet name. He's brought help, she said, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. The terrified woman who had cowered before Kieran just minutes ago was gone, replaced by someone who felt the thrill of impending battle rather than paralyzing fear. Lysander's lips curved in a smile that revealed teeth slightly too sharp to be entirely human. Good, he said, and there was something predatory in his tone that made her pulse quicken with excitement rather than fear. I was hoping for a proper hunt. His hand found hers, and she felt power flowing between them, ancient, wild, transformative. But even as their connection strengthened, she noticed the way his nostrils flared, catching the same scent that had disturbed her. His golden eyes narrowed with confusion and growing alarm. Stay close to me, Evangeline. It's time you learned what you really are. 3 black SUVs pulled into her farmyard, disgorging men in expensive suits who moved with military precision. These weren't local thugs or hired muscle, they moved like soldiers, like hunters trained to kill things that shouldn't exist. Each one carried weapons that gleamed with more than steel, and Evangeline's enhanced senses caught the acrid scent of silver coating their ammunition. Kieran climbed out of the lead vehicle, his face twisted with rage and humiliation, but there was something different about him now. Gone was the pretense of wounded lover or spurned fiancé. What remained was something cold and calculating, a predator who had finally dropped his mask. I warned you, Eva, he called out, his voice echoing off the barn walls. But the tone was wrong, all wrong. The Irish accent she remembered from their courtship had vanished, replaced by something older, more cultured. Nobody makes a fool of Kieran Ashworth. Especially not some backwoods farm girl who doesn't even know what she really is. The way he said it sent ice through her veins, not the words of a rejected lover, but the cold assessment of a hunter who had been playing a very long game. As Kieran's men spread out to surround them, something extraordinary began to happen. Lysander's form seemed to blur and shift, his human facade slipping to reveal something magnificent and terrifying beneath. His golden eyes blazed like twin suns, and she could swear she saw shadows of massive claws and sharp teeth flickering around his edges. The air itself seemed to vibrate with supernatural power, and Evangeline felt answering energy surging through her own body. But even as her wolf nature responded to the call of her alpha, her newly awakened senses were screaming warnings about the man she had once thought she loved. "Last chance to walk away," Lysander called out, his voice carrying impossible authority. One of Kieran's men actually took a step backward before catching himself, confusion and instinctive fear warring on his face. These were trained killers, veterans of supernatural hunts, yet even they could feel the power radiating from the alpha werewolf. But Kieran himself seemed unaffected by the display of otherworldly force, and that fact sent warning bells clanging in Evangeline's mind. No normal human could stand in the presence of an enraged alpha without feeling some effect. "Oh, but this is exactly where I want to be," Kieran said, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He reached into his jacket with deliberate slowness, drawing not just a gun but something that made Lysander snarl with primal fury. The weapon was beautiful and terrible, ancient silver worked with symbols that hurt to look at directly, its surface gleaming with malevolent power. "Do you like it? It's been in my family for generations. Perfect for killing monsters." But it was the scent that hit her first, familiar in a way that made her stomach lurch with horrified recognition. Beneath the cologne and manufactured charm, beneath the careful human mask he had worn for 2 years, was something that called to her blood with sickening intimacy. Family. The word echoed in her mind like a death knell, carrying implications too horrible to fully comprehend. "You're not human," Evangeline whispered, the words torn from her throat by the force of revelation. Everything about their relationship suddenly made terrible sense, the way he had pursued her with single-minded determination, the questions that had seemed like romantic interest but were actually interrogation, the way he had pushed her toward isolation and desperation. He hadn't been trying to control her out of possessiveness. He had been studying her, waiting to see if her dormant abilities would manifest. Kieran's laugh was like breaking glass, sharp and cutting. "Human? Oh, my dear sister, neither of us has been human for a very long time." The word "sister" hit her like a physical blow, and she staggered backward into Lysander's protective embrace. "Did you really think it was coincidence that brought us together? That a wealthy businessman just happened to fall in love with a struggling farm girl? I've been watching you your entire life, waiting to see if you would develop our father's gifts." The world tilted around her as memories flooded back, not her own, but older, deeper, carried in her very DNA. Flashes of a pale, beautiful man with eyes like winter storms and a smile that promised both ecstasy and death. A man who had walked through human history for centuries, leaving a trail of hybrid children in his wake, most of whom died before their supernatural heritage could fully manifest. Those who survived long enough to develop their abilities posed a threat to his power, competition for his dark throne. "Father always said there could be only one heir to his legacy," Kieran continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than centuries of familial murder. "Imagine my surprise when I realized little Eva might actually be developing abilities. The dreams started 6 months ago, didn't they? The nightmares of running through forests, of transforming, of power you couldn't understand or control." His smile widened at her expression of shocked recognition. "I've killed 17 half-siblings over the years. You would have been number 18 if you hadn't run away from our wedding." Lysander's growl shook the very foundations of the earth, rage and protective fury rolling off him in waves that made the air shimmer with heat. "Vampire spawn," he snarled, and the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place for Evangeline. Their father wasn't just any vampire, he was old enough and powerful enough to create hybrid children, beings who carried both vampire and supernatural potential in their veins. But the wolf blood in her heritage hadn't come from their father's side. "My mother," she gasped, understanding flooding through her like ice water. She wasn't human either. The woman who had died when Evangeline was just 3 years old, the woman she barely remembered except for golden eyes that had looked at her with such love and sorrow. She was a werewolf. Clever girl, Kieran said with mock approval. Father seduced her during one of his hunts, not realizing what she was until it was too late. By then, she was already pregnant with his little abomination. He tried to kill her, of course, but she managed to escape long enough to give birth. She died protecting you from his hunters, buying you just enough time to disappear into the human world. The cruelty in his voice when he spoke of her mother's sacrifice made something snap inside Evangeline's chest. Raw, primal fury flooded through her system, and for the first time in her life, she felt her supernatural heritage respond fully to her emotional state. Power crackled around her like visible electricity, her eyes blazing with inner fire as the wolf and vampire aspects of her nature finally began to merge into something unprecedented. "And you," she said, her voice carrying new authority that made even Kieran's trained killers shift nervously. "You've been hunting our siblings for sport. Playing the devoted brother while murdering family." The hypocrisy of it, the calculated evil, made her want to tear him apart with her bare hands. "How many, Kieran? How many brothers and sisters did you kill before you came for me?" "Enough to prove my loyalty to father," he replied coldly. "Enough to earn my place as his only acknowledged heir. You see, unlike you, I embraced what I am from the beginning. I never pretended to be human, never tried to suppress my nature or live among the cattle. I am vampire first and always, and that makes me stronger than any half-breed wolf hybrid could ever be." But even as he spoke, Evangeline could see the lie in his words. The silver weapon in his hands, the careful way he maintained distance from both her and Lysander, the subtle tremor in his voice when her power flared, he was afraid. For all his boasting and cruelty, Kieran feared what she might become if her abilities fully awakened. That fear had driven him to infiltrate her life, to study her weaknesses and plan her destruction before she could realize her true potential. "The engagement," she said, pieces of his deception falling into place like dominoes. "You were never planning to marry me. You were waiting for the perfect moment to kill me, weren't you? The wedding would have been my execution." "A beautiful ceremony," Kieran agreed with savage satisfaction. "I had it all planned out, a tragic accident on our honeymoon, perhaps, or a mysterious illness that would claim my beloved bride. Father would have been so proud to see his last potential rival eliminated with such style and precision." Lysander's control finally snapped completely. The alpha werewolf erupted into his true form with a roar that shattered windows and sent Kieran's men scrambling for cover. But the massive silver wolf that emerged was beyond anything Evangeline had imagined possible, easily the size of a small horse, with fur that gleamed like liquid moonlight and eyes that burned like stars. This was no ordinary werewolf, but an alpha of alphas, a creature of such primal power that reality itself seemed to bend around his presence. Yet even faced with an enraged alpha in full transformation, Kieran remained unnaturally calm. The silver weapon in his hands began to glow with unholy light, symbols carved into its surface writhing like living things. "Beautiful," he murmured appreciatively. "Father will be so pleased when I bring him your heart as a wedding gift to my new vampire bride." The casual mention of another bride, another innocent woman who would suffer the same fate Evangeline had barely escaped, sent her own rage spiraling beyond all control. The hybrid blood in her veins responded to her fury, vampire coldness merging with wolf fire to create something that had never existed before. Power exploded outward from her body in visible waves, and for one terrifying moment, both Kieran and Lysander stopped their deadly dance to stare at her in shocked recognition. "You want to know what I really am?" Evangeline asked, her voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for any single throat to produce. The wolf song of Lysander's kind merged with the hypnotic compulsion of vampire speech, creating something that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the soul. "I'm not just a hybrid, brother dear. I'm evolution." The silver coins fused to her palm began to crack and blacken, Victor's binding magic unable to contain the unprecedented power flowing through her system. She was vampire and werewolf, predator and pack creature, darkness and light merged into something entirely new. And as her true nature finally awakened fully, both sides of the supernatural world would have to reckon with what they had helped create. Kieran's mask of calm finally slipped, revealing the desperate fear beneath his calculated cruelty. Impossible, he breathed, backing away as cracks appeared in the very air around Evangeline's transformed state. Father said you were just another failed experiment, another weak hybrid to be culled from the bloodline. Father was wrong, she replied, advancing on him with predatory grace that combined the best aspects of both her supernatural heritages. The silver weapon in his hands was trembling now, its ancient magic recoiling from contact with her unprecedented nature. And so were you when you thought love was weakness, that family was something to be murdered for personal gain. Behind her, Lysander had resumed human form, but his golden eyes never left the confrontation unfolding before him. She could feel his presence like an anchor, steady and supportive, giving her the strength to face the brother who had spent years planning her death. Their mate bond pulsed with shared power and purpose, werewolf alpha and hybrid evolution united against a common enemy. You want to eliminate competition for father's affection? Evangeline continued, her voice carrying the promise of retribution centuries in the making. Then you should have made sure I stayed dead the first time. Chapter 6, The Alpha Unleashed. What happened next would be burned into Evangeline's memory forever. Lysander moved faster than thought, faster than physics should have allowed, becoming a blur of motion and lethal grace. One moment he was standing beside her in human form, the next he was a massive silver wolf larger than any natural predator, his golden eyes blazing with supernatural fire as he launched himself at Kieran's gunman with devastating efficiency. The transformation didn't frighten Evangeline, it thrilled her. Every cell in her body sang with recognition and desire as she watched her mate in his true form, powerful beyond human comprehension, protecting her with the fierce devotion of an alpha defending his pack. She felt her own body responding, muscles shifting and changing, senses exploding with new intensity as her dormant wolf nature finally awakened fully. Kieran's men scattered like leaves before a hurricane, their training and weapons useless against a creature of legend made flesh. Those who tried to stand and fight found themselves facing not just Lysander but Evangeline as well, her partially transformed state granting her strength and speed that defied human limits. She moved like liquid silver, her movements perfectly synchronized with her alphas as if they had been hunting together for centuries. But Kieran himself proved more dangerous than his hired muscle. As his men fled in terror, he revealed the true extent of his obsession and preparation. From his jacket he pulled not just a gun but specialized ammunition, silver bullets that gleamed with more than mere metal. Did you think I didn't know what you are, Eva? He snarled, backing toward his vehicle while keeping the weapon trained on her. I've been hunting your kind for years. The silver scent hit Evangeline's enhanced senses like acid, and she saw Lysander falter mid-attack, pain flashing across his magnificent features. Silver was poison to their kind, she realized with growing horror. Kieran wasn't just an abusive ex-fiancé, he was something far more dangerous. A hunter who had been tracking her wolf heritage long before she even knew it existed, using their relationship as cover for his true purpose. You really thought I loved you? Kieran's laugh was sharp and bitter as he kept the silver-loaded gun trained on them both. You were just research, Eva. A way to get close to the packs, to learn their weaknesses. But then you had to run away and ruin everything. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Evangeline saw death approaching with crystal clarity. Her newly awakened senses could smell the silver bullets, could hear Kieran's heart racing with anticipation of the kill. But love, she realized, was stronger than silver. Without thought or hesitation, she threw herself between Kieran and Lysander just as the gun fired. The silver bullet meant for her alpha's heart struck her shoulder instead, sending liquid fire through her veins and dropping her to her knees in the mud. The pain was beyond description, beyond human endurance, but through it all she felt only fierce satisfaction. Her mate was safe. Lysander's roar of rage shook the very foundations of the earth. The partially healed alpha wolf erupted forward with such terrifying fury that Kieran's second shot went wide, the gun flying from his hands as massive claws raked across his chest. But Evangeline's sacrifice had cost them precious time. More vehicles were approaching, their engines growing louder through the morning mist. Kieran's backup plan was arriving. "The pack," Lysander growled, his form flickering between human and wolf as he knelt beside her. His hands pressed against her wound, trying to slow the silver poisoning that was spreading through her system like molten metal. "My brothers are coming." Sure enough, the approaching engines belonged to motorcycles rather than cars, and Evangeline could hear the howls of wolves carried on the wind. With his dying breath, Kieran managed one final act of spite. "You'll never be safe," he gasped, blood frothing on his lips. "The council knows about her now. They know what she is, what she could become. The hybrid bloodline was supposed to be extinct." His words sent ice through Evangeline's heart even as her body burned with silver fire. What was a hybrid bloodline? And why would something called the council want her dead? The Silver Moon pack arrived like vengeance given form, 7 massive wolves led by Lysander's beta, a scarred grey giant whose howl split the morning air. They made short work of Kieran's remaining forces, but their victory felt hollow as Evangeline's life slowly ebbed away from the silver poisoning. Lysander held her against his chest, his powerful hands gentle despite their deadly claws, whispering words of love and promise in an ancient language that her wolf's soul understood even if her human mind did not. "The silver is spreading too fast," Marcus, the pack's healer, said grimly after examining her wound. "We need to get her to the sacred grove, to the Moonwell. It's the only thing that might purify the poison from her system." Lysander lifted her effortlessly, his supernatural strength making her feel weightless and protected even as darkness crept around the edges of her vision. As they raced through the forest on motorcycle and paw, Evangeline drifted in and out of consciousness, her fevered dreams filled with visions she didn't understand. She saw herself standing in a circle of ancient stones beneath a blood-red moon, power flowing through her veins like liquid starlight. She saw armies of wolves and vampires locked in eternal war, and somehow she knew that her hybrid blood was the key to ending the conflict, or escalating it beyond all hope of peace. The Moonwell saved her life, its pure silver waters washing the poison from her system and completing her transformation into something the world had not seen for 500 years. A true hybrid, carrying both wolf and vampire heritage in her veins. As she rose from the sacred pool, power crackling around her like visible electricity, Lysander pulled her into his arms with desperate relief. "You're safe now," he whispered against her hair. "Your pack. You're mine." But their moment of peace was shattered by the arrival of a figure Evangeline recognized from her visions, a tall, pale man with eyes like chips of ancient ice and fangs that gleamed in the moonlight. "Lysander Nightfall," the vampire said, his voice carrying centuries of authority and menace. "I am Victor Drackle, High Lord of the Crimson Court. And you have something that belongs to us." His cold gaze fixed on Evangeline, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. "The last of the hybrid bloodline was promised to my coven long ago. It's time to collect on that debt." For the first time, Evangeline felt safe in Lysander's arms, but in the shadows of the sacred grove, another pair of golden eyes had already chosen her fate.